All right, welcome. We're glad you're joining us tonight for our Tuesday night podcast. And as always, especially if you're joining us for the first time, we just want to let you know that we are open for questions, and we want your questions. We welcome your questions. So put them in the if you're using the app, the YouTube app on your phone, or if you're using a computer, there's a chat box on the side, and you can throw your questions in. They don't have to be on topic. We will have a topic rolling, but you can ask any question you want. If you're curious and you want to know about God and you want to understand God better, this is a great place to start. And so, again, we welcome you to ask your questions, use the chat box. And if you're watching this afterwards, you can throw them in the comment section and someone will contact you with an answer. All right, so tonight, the title, what's the science behind that? I don't necessarily mean that title to get super scientific, but that term or that question is asked a lot in forums and videos that people put out when it comes to the human body and the idea of trying to understand somebody's thing they're selling. And I know we're not selling something in that same context, but there is a practical explanation to everything we do. It's not like everything is just, well, actually I can pose this as a question. Is there a practical explanation to everything you do as a Christian?
Yes, there should be. That's the thing. And
okay.
I'm going to be talking about this tomorrow night in my sermon.
Really?
Because I think, because when it comes to people being religious, that's one of the things that I noticed when I first became a Christian is that religious people believe in silly stuff, things that don't make sense to non-religious people.
Give me an example of that.
Okay. I'm actually using it tomorrow in my sermon, but I was I was living in Gibraltar. I was pastoring in Gibraltar, and Gibraltar has a really big Jewish community, Orthodox Jewish community. And there was a young man who came to work for the company I was in. This is a small company with probably, I think, 10 people. And so we're all really, we worked all together closely, so there's lots of opportunity to be able to just idle talk and hear everybody talking, and so one of the guys asked this Jewish Orthodox young man, he said, so you don't eat pork, why? And he said, well, because pigs are unclean animals. And he says, what does that mean? And he said, well, they roll around in the mud. And I thought, oh my word, this guy doesn't even know biblically what an unclean animal is. And he said, so you don't eat pork because they roll around in the mud? And he said, yeah, they get dirty. And he said, well, so are cows clean? Do they take showers or what? Is like, and the guy was really having a hard time answering the question. I mean, he basically failed miserably. And I actually kind of jumped in subtly and explained that the idea of being an unclean animal had absolutely nothing to do with it being dirty. But that's what I mean, is that kind of a thing of, these are things that religious people hold. Mm-hmm. They're not even sure of the truth behind what they're saying. It's just what they've learned, from their religion. And then when a non-believer wants to ask questions about it, they often can't answer why they do it. They just do it. Well, we do that because that's what Christians do. Yeah. And that's not Christianity. Yeah. That's religion. Yeah. That's not Christianity. Because what Christians do, though there may be some things that non-Christians won't understand about why we do what we do, it's still sensible. Yeah. They may not understand from the standpoint that it might be something like, well, how can you live like that? How can you live under this kind of limitation or something like that? But as far as the actual thing itself, it's very understandable. It's not some weird, bizarre ritual.
Right. So there's when I grew up in church. I grew up in, and we've talked about this many times, but one of the things that I actually started realizing when I was thinking about this podcast is that for 30 years, being in the church for 30 years, growing up in church, even in the Sunday school time of my life, I never understood Jesus at a practical level. I never understood him at a simple level. And so when I met Jesus at 30 years old and began to, form a genuine relationship with him, I had to actually learn, and this in a huge part is what yours and my relationship was like, was you helping me unlearn all the impractical things that I thought, not just about God, but about life in general, is that life became very complicated in my mind. And so one of the things that people do when like these forums and these videos I'm talking about, somebody's talking about, I don't know, a fat loss theory or some fact that they're trying to push is, this is the way to do it. They often say, and I'll explain the science behind that. And so what they do is they basically help you sift through all the weeds to get to the simplicity and the practical application of what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And so they'll talk about things from the standpoint of like, okay, I know everything I just said sounds almost too good to be true, but it really is quite simple. And then they'll begin to explain it. So can you give me an example of maybe some of the things, or maybe just one good example of some of the things that people, religious, maybe curious but skeptical, because we've talked about like Gandhi and his doubts about Christianity because of Christians, and so Christianity became very impractical in his mind. It's like Jesus makes sense, but the people following him don't. They made the whole thing not understandable. What would you say are some of the things that people run into in their minds that make Christianity more complicated than it actually is?
Well, that was actually the thing with Gandhi. That was what turned him away from Christianity, was that very thing, is he had actually wanted to attend a church. And in India, they have a caste system, and which he obviously was in total disagreement with, the whole idea of caste.
Describe that.
Caste, it's a hierarchy. Wherever you're born is where you stay,
Right.
So you got like poor people, rich people, that kind of that's the idea of a caste system, is you've got people that have privilege basically by birth. Mm-hmm. And so he had gone to a church that didn't allow his caste to come to. Mm-hmm. And so they said, we're really glad that you want to come, but you have to go to one of the other churches because this is for a specific caste. And he was like, what in the world are you talking about? This is, what makes this any different than the Indian government, the Indian way of life? So I thought Christianity was supposed to be different from that. And that was the problem, is that it didn't make any sense. It was just senseless, because here he is, becoming part of a religion, using the word, a part of a religion where still shows the same prejudice as the nation they're supposedly trying to reach. So here are these Christians that are supposedly coming to reach this nation with Christianity, and they tailor their Christianity to fit the society. So what's the point? I thought you were bringing us something that transcended,
Right.
not that could be molded and shaped into the same thing. So that's an example of the problem with religion,
right.
is that where's, like you're saying, so where's the science behind that? Why? What would be the point of giving your life to Jesus if you're going to still be the organization itself is still going to practice unfairness, and inequality or inequality.
Can you give me an example of that? Like maybe try to think back on, like, I don't know, just the last few weeks we've been doing a lot of one-on-one evangelism, where we go out on the streets and we talk to people individually, one-on-one. Have you ran into these situations where you're talking to somebody who has, maybe not the same situation or scenario that's played out in their lives, but they have the same view of a complicated Christianity?
Yeah, almost everyone that I talk to that has any kind of religious background. I mentioned it in the podcast last week of talking to a man, very analytical-minded individual, but when it came to religion, he was quite happy to embrace contradictory thoughts. Mm-hmm. That, like, for example, that I had mentioned to him about, I knew that if God was real and Christianity was real, that I would go to hell because I was violating the principles of Christianity. And he said, well, why do you have to accept all of it? Can't you just accept the belief in Jesus and then get rid of the part about hell? And that's like, that's, now I'm just making up my own religion. There's nothing sensible in that.
Yeah.
But this is one of the difficulties that I think many have when it comes to being religious, having religious backgrounds, is that even though they themselves in normal life may be very analytical, when it comes to their religion, they're very insane. I mean, they're just not. They're all over the place. They're very, distorted in their thinking.
Mm-hmm. So you talk a lot about the mind in the sermons you preach, but also in our podcast. It seems like a good portion of our podcasts go towards thinking and really focus on thinking. And obviously, the reason why is because that's where a lot of the problem remains in people's lives. Like the root of the problem is often in the way you think. But why do you think the mind makes such a complication of things? What is it about human nature that adapts that? I mean, anybody who knows really anything about the theory of evolution, and I mean that, holistically, that's the whole thing together. There is no God. We started from nothing and, worked our way up to what we are today over millions of years. But the complication behind that, and the fact that a lot of people would actually live their lives based on something so complicated is interesting to me. What do you think it is in human nature that loves complexities like that and is willing to just keep them?
Yeah, I don't
profess them.
Yeah, I don't think it's a love for complexity. I think it's just the nature of the beast. The illustration that came to my mind is the mind prefers to be on a track. So if we think about it in terms of like a train, a train does best going straight along the track without curves and turns and switches and various things. It can be at full speed and it can hum along and it's doing quite fine. But when it reaches switches in the tracks and different directions and things like that, that's where things can be complicated. And so what I think happens in our thinking is we hit a point to where to go forward means to admit, a flaw or a deficiency in our thinking. To keep going forward means you're going to have to make corrections to the way that you think. In other words, you're going to have to start laying down more track before you catch up to it and you're off the end of the track, and we don't want to do that. We don't want to have to lay more track. We want to be able to just keep going along with what we believe and just hoping that everything will be okay. And I think that that's where the problem lies, is that we don't want to change the way we think about things. We just want to be right. And so I think that that's the problem. So what happens is, in order to make ourselves right, we put in all kinds of switches and curves, tracks going in this way and that way, in this different direction, in that different direction, so that we can swerve around the reality that there are things that we believe or things that we have embraced in our person that are wrong.
Yeah.
And rather than correcting them. So what we have is this, grapevine of track going in every different direction in our minds in order to avoid having to face the fact that we're wrong. And so, but the result is complication and confusion. And that's why we get confused, and that's why life becomes complicated. I've lately have been, even more than normal, been focusing on, there's this book I've mentioned before called Feeling Good by David Burns, on psychology. It's he's a behavioral. He's kind of. I'm probably taking it a little too far, but I would call him like the father of behavioral psychology. He's just he's been around for a long time. He's been around, I think, in the 80s is when he kind of came on the scene, and he's very against, I shouldn't say against, but very balanced in his approach to things. But he's not one to give up on people. He really does believe that if he can sort out people's thinking, then their lives will sort out. And so he's talking about a lot of different people in the book, lots of people that he mentions, and he gives these little scenarios. He does these scenarios. He loves to do these scenarios where he does a role playing scenarios with his patients, and to try to get them to see. So he has them play the other side, of the argument rather than themselves. They always play the other person in the arguments or the debates. And the number of times that while he's doing the role playing with them and he's being them, the patient is realizing, you know what, my thinking is just wrong. One lady in particular, he said, he wanted to put her on some medication because she wasn't responding to the behavioral therapy very well, and she said, I won't be able to do it. I'm very sensitive to medication, and he said, I'd like to try an experiment with you. He says, I'm going to give you some pills to take. It'll be a small dosage of some antidepressant stuff, and I'm going to give it to you. And but what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some red pills and some yellow pills, and we'll do it. We'll kind of build up to it. But one set of the pills will be a placebo. They won't be real medication, and the other ones will be real medication. And then and we'll just track it over the next couple of weeks and see how you go, and then we'll evaluate it and see if you want to go further. And she was willing to do that. And so she immediately starts calling him. I'm already starting to have side effects. I'm already beginning to things. And it was getting to the point where she finally, after 2 weeks, she said, I can't take this anymore. She says, it's absolutely unbearable. Why are you putting me through this? This is horrible. The side effects of this are very terrible. I can't handle any of this. And so we have to stop. And he says, okay. He said, well, go ahead and stop taking them. And then he made an appointment with her to come in, and he said, and then we'll evaluate what happened, what days, which pills, which were the placebos, which were the good pills. And so she comes in, and he tells her, he says, listen, I just want to tell you, he said, they were all placebos. None of them were real pills. And he, he starts explaining this to her, and she said, I'm shocked. She said, I cannot believe that my thinking was so wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, I was so off base. I thought for sure that these things were killing me. Yeah. And so he said, okay. He said, what I'd like to do is I'd like to, put you on a particular medication, and so and then we'll watch it. But now that you know how your brain works. And she had very little side effects. In fact, she actually started doing his homework, which she wasn't doing before, of the various homework that he had given her of learning how to control her thinking. Doing little charts and things like that, writing down thoughts and evaluating them and stuff like that. Because he's really into sort of a self-help kind of thing. But so the brain, I mean, that's my whole point in this: is the brain is everything. It is literally everything. And so if your brain is thinking right and you're thinking the right way, then you're gonna be able to make sense of life. So if Christianity counteracts normal thinking, then Christianity isn't real. There's no God. If that's really how it is. Yeah. So in a sense, there's the science behind Christianity is that if you're believing nutty things, you're going to have a hard time being able to function in life, because it's going to counteract normal life. Mm-hmm. And so true Christianity doesn't do that. It doesn't counteract normal life. If anything, it enhances it, because you are more in control of things, because you understand principles and how life works in a far better way.
So we're gonna talk a little bit about Christianity specifically, but still trying to stay on the track of talking about just living and thinking and stuff like that. Let's say outside of a relationship with Jesus, which is what we are talking about all the time, mm-hmm. and what we promote, what is a way for people's mind to well, let me ask you this: is that the threshold? Can you be free in your mind from that standpoint without knowing Jesus personally and having a relationship with Jesus?
Yes, because you trying to formulate how to say it. Because you can live according to godly principles without being a Christian. Mm. Because godly principles are actually well used. You'll hear a lot of motivation. It's funny, the number of motivational speakers and self-help people and things like that quote scripture. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, listening to various books. I listen to a lot of books, and so listening to a lot of books, I find it's very it's very interesting that many of these authors and like I said, motivational speakers, that they will quote scriptures and they'll quote them correctly, mm-hmm. And how they apply to life, yeah. And it's funny because it's like, well, where did this book come from? Did it come from some, it's a bunch of fishermen and a bunch of, shepherds and things. Well, where did the wisdom come from this? And so that really does show you that not only that Christianity is applicable to normal life, but that it's clearly Christianity has something to offer that nothing else does. So as far as wisdom goes.
Yeah. What is that? What is it? What is the thing? Because this is kind of leading into the next part of this podcast is what is the thing that we are talking about that we can show people the practical, so people, it's okay, all right, that sounds great, but what's the science behind that? What is the thing we're offering?
Well, so anyone who is doing well, okay, in life, and not, when I say doing well, I mean at all levels. I don't just mean because we've talked about this before. Is you have Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk,
Warren Buffett,
not Warren Buffett, but Elon Musk. That these are people that have. Well, it's not just rich people that I'm pointing out. I'm successful people. But also are failing in other areas of their lives. They're not successful in every area of their lives. Usually relational problems. Steve Jobs, although he's passed away, Steve Jobs was in the same category of people that were successful but failed relationally. In different areas, whether it's like in Steve Jobs' case with employees and with his own children, or marriages or whatever. There's all these breakdowns, and so you can't the one doesn't help the other. Being able to be a success in terms of technically, technical success or business success doesn't automatically follow that you're going to be successful in other areas of your life. So we have multiple areas of our lives where we're trying to achieve success, and the one doesn't. You can't just go to school for one of those things and be successful in all of them. You need something more. And that's the thing with Christianity that is the distinctive, is that Christianity doesn't fail in any particular area. It is successful in business. It's successful in relationships. It's successful financially. It's successful with mentally. Which is a lot of the things we're talking about. But just every aspect of life. I'm just kind of throwing things out there. But the whole idea, Christianity is the one that speaks of body, soul, and spirit. That these distinctive parts of who we are, being worked out, and the Bible speaks to all of those areas. It speaks to us bodily, our soul, and our spirit. So it's not just some specific area. It's right across the board, but it is successful in every area when practiced appropriately, and when the foundation is a relationship with the God of Christianity, not just the religion of Christianity, but you have a relationship with the God of Christianity, and you're living in cooperation. The word, that we use in church is obedience, but when you're living in cooperation with God and with His way, of how He's created the world.
So is God practical?
Well, I think my reading of the Bible, probably more so than most people even understand.
Give me some examples of that. How is God practical?
Okay, we're really just stomping all over my sermon tomorrow, but
this is my whole podcast, man. Yeah. So either we stop the podcast, or you just
God says,
find some good answers here.
So God says. Here's an example. God is, so Moses is, God's delivering, he goes to Pharaoh, Moses goes to Pharaoh and says, "Thus says the Lord, let my people go." And so they, the plagues and all that, and they end up leaving Egypt, and they eventually get to a place to where they're stopping at Sinai. And Moses goes up to get the commandments from God, and then he while he's up there, they make the golden calf. They said, we don't know what happened to Moses. Make us gods.
They being the people down.
The people down in the valley that are God's people, my people. And so this is going to become very important in just a sec, because God says, no, go back down there, because the people you brought out of Egypt are dancing around a golden calf and violating everything that I've said for you to write down. And so he goes down there. It's a whole mess. They're worshiping a golden calf. They're dancing and they're naked, and just totally out of their heads. And for the next several chapters, as God is speaking to Moses, he never calls them his people anymore. He says, your people. These are yours now. I don't know if I want them anymore. And so that's what, when I say practical, it's like, okay, you don't want me? Fine. He's not, doing something that is weird or strange, and sometimes people will take a verse out of Psalms or something like that where God is pleading with the people and then say that this is how God feels all the time about rebellious people, and it's not how God feels all the time about rebellious people. That would just simply be weird. And you have these, like we talked about the other day, this Hosea, and this is an illustration that God is giving. It's an illustration. It's not. This is not. God is not. He's not. Saying. He's not in the corner crying because his heart is broken because of Israel. Or anything like that. He's saying, this is what you are. You guys are just a bunch of like prostitutes. You just take off at any moment and go hook up with whoever comes by. And this is God just being super practical, and just saying, this is how you are. Why do I even bother with you? You're like an unfaithful wife. What's the point of me even reaching out to you anymore when you're doing all this stuff? And he does give them hope. If you'll turn, if you'll repent, I'll take you back, and I will help you. There's a song. It's funny because here's an impractical by Jeremy Camp, and it's called "I'll Take You Back," and it says, "I'll take you back always. It doesn't matter what you do. I'll take you back." And this whole idea, and it's like, that's not the God that I know. That's not the God of the Bible. He didn't take Judas back. Jesus, he goes to Herod. Herod, do some magic shows for me. Do something special. Show me who you are. And he don't say squat. Jesus doesn't say nothing. And he's like, oh, so you're not going to say anything? I'm the most powerful man in Israel right now, and you're not going to say nothing? And he doesn't say anything. It's like, I don't need to talk to you. You're nothing to me. You're going to act like I needed to do a show, and so we see all this, is just such a practical element.
Okay, so we've already kind of talked about this, but I just want you to answer the question. Generally speaking, are people practical?
Are people?
Yeah.
Some.
Generally speaking.
I can't answer that question. I don't know everybody.
Oh, come on. You've been 30 plus years. You've been working with people.
I don't know everybody. But let's put it this way. I would say that my observations from, living in Spain, living in England, living in America, I would say for the most part, people can be practical. Yeah. There's not that many people, but for some weird reason, Christians seem to have a higher percentage of impractical people than Christianity, than non-Christianity. In other words, the people that I know that are Christians, I'd say there's a higher percentage of them that are impractical. Impractical is probably not the right terminology for it, but just simply nonsensible. They're just not sensible. They believe things that are not sensible. Basically things like, I can do bad things and good things will come from it because I know God. That would be the general way of putting it. Where non-Christians don't, for the most part, they don't believe that there's some supernatural force that's going to make everything okay for them. They realize if they screw up, they're going to have to pay the price for it. But they may have a lack of understanding of what screw up means. But when it comes to Christians seem to take this confidence that I can screw up and God's just going to fix it. Kind of like a spoiled child. And so I would say that that's probably the best way to answer that question.
Okay, we have a question from Clarissa. If God is such a balanced and practical God, and it clearly shows that in the Bible, why do most Christians and churches show such an emphasis on God's love and forgiveness and grace?
Well, I think that goes back to we need to be careful with so much, most those kinds of statements probably are not fair to just kind of throw out there, since we don't know most Christians or most churches or things like that. But at the same time, it is popular. Grace, teaching on grace and love and forgiveness is popular and should be. That there should be an emphasis on that, because we live in a world that has, that's violated in relationship with God. So there needs to be that understanding that God does forgive, and that God will have grace, and he will receive bad apples, it's not even bad apples, it's bad people. I mean, just in general, just people in general, we're all bad, and none, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. There's none righteous. So we all come at this very, very wrongly, when it comes to Christianity. So that message needs to be there. I mean, that message has to be there, that God so loved the world that he gave his only son. But see, these are balanced and practical things.
Yeah.
Is that, if God gave his son, okay, if you put that in terms of balance, if God gave his son, what does that tell you about the other side of the scale? That we're really screwed up.
Yeah.
And so that's how he made it balance, is through Jesus, that our screw up has been met, has been equaled by Jesus' sacrifice on the cross. And so the weight of sin, the weight of guilt that weighs upon the unsaved has been equalized through Jesus. And so you need to communicate that. There needs to be that understanding. The problem is where I think where it crosses the line is that it's once you become a Christian, everything changes. There's a again, it's one of the things I'm talking about tomorrow, is the idea of being converted. You have to be converted. In other words, you have to come to a point to where you're not the same person anymore. So when you become a Christian, you don't stay the same. You become something else. You become something different, and all of the sin and rebellion and disobedience against God begins to be dealt with. And you start realizing and learning, I can't do this anymore. I have to do this instead. I can't, things like, Jesus said, you have heard it said. And then he said, but I'm saying to you. And so he's given a whole new point of view. Like, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But I'm saying to you, love your enemy. And so now that's a whole new thing. That's a whole new realm. And again, it's still practical, because the problem is what we do without God when it comes to enemies, not what we should do. Loving your enemies is what you should do. And the reason why you need to love your enemies is because you only hurt yourself by hating your enemies. There's nothing you can do to keep your enemies from being your enemies. The only thing you can do is to resolve that although they are your enemy, they are not going to become your enemy. Otherwise you are just as bad as they are. And see, so that's again the idea of the practical side of Christianity, is that, somebody's a horrible person, that's fine. They're a horrible person. But if you reject them, if you, if you're accusing them and you're holding things against them, well, you are becoming a horrible person. So it won't be long and you will be just like them. And that's very practical. So loving your enemies is a way of remedying a bad situation so that you don't become like that.
So do you think maybe back to Clarissa's question, do you think that this is maybe an issue of oversimplifying things maybe on the part of the, I want to say preacher, but on the side of the Christian, the representative really?
Well, like I said, the idea of God's love and forgiveness is when it's presented as love, forgiveness, and grace are the only things that matter.
Right.
And you ignore judgment and justice,
Yeah.
Those kinds of things. When you ignore
like
those
an
things,
overemphasis on those things.
So now you're talking not about God anymore.
Right.
You're talking about your opinion of God, of who you think God is, no longer who God actually is. And so the problem is not God. The problem is the presentation that's wrong, which is, like I said, that comes back to the whole, switches and curved tracks and things like that of trying to avoid being wrong, it's like, so you can still be greedy and saved.
Yeah.
So you're going to put up this tangled mess of track in your mind so you can avoid having to face the fact that you're greedy.
Right. So how do you, so this is kind of what I'm leading at, because you have this group of people, which is why I kind of used Gandhi in the beginning, is you have this group of people who represent God in a very complicated way, including what you just described. And so when the non-Christian comes and sees the church, sometimes that's what they see. Gandhi saw that.
Yeah.
And so, that would lead us to think that a lot of people probably see that, especially in a church like what the Christian church has become in America, what we refer to often as the religious group of people, right? How do you, for the non-believer, how do you get through all that stuff? How do you describe, this is the science behind it?
Yeah.
Here's why it's so understandable, why so practical, why having a relationship with Jesus is not a complicated concept.
Yeah. Well, the salvation is really simple in terms of its structure. What makes it difficult is, again, it's our unwillingness to abide by, to follow God's path. Mm-hmm. That's why Jesus said that the way to salvation is narrow, not broad, and the few will be that find it. And so for the person who wants to know God and have a relationship with God or believes in God, but has a problem with organized religion or the church, I think the best approach is, first of all, you're going to need to find. It's not. You got to find a church where that's like that. I mean, that's going to be a factor.
You're in the right place, obviously.
That's going to be a factor. Well, I'm not saying ours is the right place. I'm just saying that the factor is going to be: is it complicated?
Yeah.
Is it stupid? Do you hear sermons and you think that's just senseless? Mm-hmm. Not do you disagree with it. That's a whole nother story. Disagreement and being senseless are not the same thing. Mm-hmm. It's being honest enough to be able to hear what's being said and said. That makes practical sense, but I don't like it. That's fine. That's fine. That's being honest. Mm-hmm. And that's probably the best way to come into Christianity is like that, is to be able to have that ability to be able to say, okay, I don't like this, but it makes sense.
Yeah.
And then that way you can begin to change your thinking, by thinking, okay, do I want my way, or do I, which is impractical, and religious and twisted, switching tracks.
Yeah.
Or do you want to have a life that has some sort of fluidity to it and progress to it? Then you're going to have to start abandoning your ideas that contradict that fluidity and continuous progression. Yeah. And so the Bible, is I can't emphasize enough that, and for everybody listening who says I've read the Bible, if you can say I've read the Bible, you haven't read the Bible. Because if you are reading the Bible, reading present continuous, then you will realize that every time you pick the Bible up and you read, it's going to speak something more than it did the last time you picked it up. And so the Bible is never something that you gain all the concepts and precepts all in one go, or 2 or 10 or 100. You're always developing a deeper understanding for the concepts of Christianity as they're presented in the scriptures, because it's a progressive revelation. God will not reveal to you more than what you're able to implement. And so this is why a lot of people don't grow as Christians, is because God can't give them anymore because they're not willing to implement it.
Yeah.
And so the Bible is a real cornerstone to truly understanding Christianity. And I find it interesting. It's been something that's been very interesting to me, is the number of people that I know that will argue about how Christianity is understandable without the Bible. Mm-hmm. That, oh, no, I can understand God and the things of God. I don't need a book, to be able to tell me this. And it's like, no, that's not true. That's not true at all. You do need a book. You have to. As a matter of fact, you can't otherwise, because if you don't have the book, then all you have is what's going on in your own head.
Yeah.
And you can't learn from yourself. You can't dig into your own mind and learn. Mm-hmm. You already know it. Mm-hmm. It's already there. If you're going to learn, you have to get information from outside of yourself. Yeah. And then that will change the way that you think, and that will begin to build up some understanding of something new. It'd be like saying, okay, well, I'm going to learn how to play guitar. And so you go and you buy a guitar. You don't know what a chord is. You don't know how to put your fingers. You don't even know which way you're supposed to hold the guitar. You don't know anything about it. And you're just going to think your way through that. You're just going to think about it, look at the guitar, analyze it, consider it, think, okay, there's strings, there's frets, there's this, okay. So I think if I put my finger here, and I put my finger here, and I put my finger here. No, you're going to have some kind of external influence in order to learn how to play that. And if you're going to get better, then you're going to do like what my son Elliot does, is watch videos from masters, and read or listen to presentations given by master guitarists, mm-hmm. and then you're going to get better.
Yeah.
But you're not going to ever come to a place to where I don't need any more. I from here on, I can just practice and I'll just get better. No, you need people who are better than you in front of you. And so there's a similar truth in the Bible. The Bible is always better than you are. Always better than you are.
So we've talked a lot about your testimony in previous podcasts. Matter of fact, I think one even recently, where you kind of shared this your experience before you became a Christian. Really, a couple different visits to a couple different churches, and from my memory of your stories of these, made Christianity pretty not simple anymore. It's almost like Christianity is hypocritical, if that's what it is, right?
Yeah.
And so, how did you get through the difficulty of thinking and example of those things, and then still give Christianity a chance, for lack of a better term?
Well, the good news is that God exists, and that has to be a starting point in anybody's thinking. And that, I think, there has to be a measure of honesty when it comes to the idea of the reality of the concept of God, is that this is something that is in our conscious thinking, everybody's conscious thinking. Nobody knows beyond a shadow of a doubt in their thinking, God doesn't exist. That's all there is to it. It's not. No, they may reject it. But the idea of having this sort of neutral, non-existent, nothing in your thinking ever processes the idea of there being a God, it's just not reality. It's just not reality. And so that's the good news, because why I say that is because when I was going to these churches and visiting these churches, the idea of God's existence was never changed by my visiting of those churches. So I didn't go to a church, see the hypocrisy, see all this, and say, okay, God doesn't exist. It was more like, what are these people doing? Do they really believe that they're somehow connected to God with this foolish way of living? The things that they believed, and actually worse than that, it was the things that they claimed to believe, but didn't.
Yeah.
And they only claimed to believe them. They said them with their mouth.
Yeah.
But they weren't really what they believed in the practicality of their lives.
What do you mean by that? They didn't believe.
Well, I've run into this on several occasions of a statement will be made,
right?
A statement of belief, but yet in behavior, it's completely opposite. It's not
only seeing that in Christianity, or it's not in general.
Oh, I've seen it in other places as well. But because it's it's funny to hear, like, what was it? Somebody said to me, I can't remember what it was exactly. I've got 3 or 4 different ideas that are running around in my mind from 3 or 4 different people. But, when somebody says, well, personally, I'm not like that.
Yeah.
And they make a statement. They say, I'm not like that, and whatever that thing is. And and I think, what do you mean? That is exactly who you are. That's exactly how you act. Those are the things that you say. Like somebody might say, well, I'm not a negative person, but yet every time you say something, they always have a negative spin on things. I'm not normally a negative person. I'm usually a very positive person. It's just that right now, I don't think the things are going to get any better. And I think that life sucks right now. And I think this is a horrible time to be alive. And I think that the stock market's going to crash. And I think it's going to probably rain tomorrow and more than likely flood us out. And we're probably going to lose power. But listen, I am a positive person. And you're like, just because you say that doesn't mean that that's valid. And there are a lot of, to me, it just seems that there are quite a few people that they live like that. They believe that if something comes out of their mouth, that it's a fact, and all the other contradictory actions now are dissolved, and none of them count because I just said I'm a positive person. So the thing I said about the weather, the thing I said about life, the thing I said about the stock market, those are now null and void. You cannot use those as examples anymore because I just told you that I'm a positive person. So you can't use those anymore. It's not. And this is how people kind of settle in. And so when it comes to the things of God, for me, it was no different. Going to churches and seeing that same kind of behavior. It was normal human behavior, but just applied to religion. And it didn't change my ideas or thoughts about who God was because I thought God isn't like them. They may think this is who God is, but there's no way God could be like that. It was like, to me, it was like, there's just no way that if there is a God, that he would be like that. That just makes no sense whatsoever that he would be like that. Right. No practical sense. And so when I became a Christian, when I encountered genuine Christianity, I realized that was I get it. These people, this is the God that I've believed in, to some degree. It was like that, my concept, my sort of construct of who God was, when he doesn't bend the rules, to accommodate our foolishness, stuff like that. And, talking about past tense, I used to do these sins, but now I'm free. I don't do them anymore. God doesn't care. God loves me anyway. And in fact, there's a lady I was told about, I didn't actually hear it, but there's a lady who was told about, in England, who was living with her boyfriend. And she said, when I'm with my boyfriend and we're being intimate, I feel the presence of God. And I thought, how bizarre is that? Number one, how bizarre is it when you're having an intimate relationship with somebody, you feel God's presence? Yeah. I mean, how weird is that? Let's just stop right there. Yeah. So there's that. But then the other factor is that God hates. God is very clear about adultery, fornication, sexual immorality. Very, very clear about in Scripture. This is unambiguous, very solid, and her response to that was her feelings, and how she felt about a thing, how her physical feelings and how that confirmed that the Bible doesn't apply to her, and that kind of stuff. Is just foolishness, It contradicts a practical understanding of who God is.
Yeah. So this last question's twofold, but it'll probably close out the podcast tonight. But I want to just read through this scripture real quick. It's because it's applicable. But Romans 1:16-20, for I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to salvation to everyone who believes. For the Jew first and also the Greek, for in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. But this is the part I want to specifically ask about. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse.
Yeah.
Twofold question. One, who is that scripture talking about? Two, what is the evidence that people are obviously suppressing, ignoring, that they can clearly see? What is that?
Yeah. So the first thing, I mean, the genius of that, this is one of the things that for me is always an indicator to me of somebody who claims to have read the Bible and then says something like how the Bible is just a bunch of children's stories. That I know that, number one, they're either being just simply plain disingenuous, or they haven't read it at all. Because, there's things like that, that particular portion of scripture. So God's plan of salvation is super complicated. I mean, incredibly complicated, but not for us. He's made it completely simple. He's dumbed it down to the lowest degree for us, but it's super complicated because he started with a people, specific people, the children of Israel, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, the descendants of Jacob, which are the children of Israel, that God began to work with them and begin to establish holiness out in the wilderness when they were delivered from Egypt. And so he began to establish the difference between holy and unholy. All the rituals that were started by Moses, were all to establish God beginning the momentum of helping them to understand there is holy, there is unholy, there's clean, there's unclean, there's righteous, there is unrighteous, and God just establishing these principles in their thinking. But yet here they are all jacked up, and they're all over the place, and God is giving them opportunity for repentance and doing certain things and allowing the enemies to come in and to utterly destroy them so that they're reaping the consequences of their disobedience to God. And this is, so the Bible talks about how the law was a schoolmaster to drive them to Christ. So the whole idea is this whole process of thou shalt not, and then reaping the consequences of the thou shalt not, was to drive them to Jesus as God's people, in their arrogance, in their pride, in their stiff-necked attitudes. And the law was this oppressive thing that was bringing consequences to their lives. And it was driving them to Jesus for salvation. But then you've got the surrounding heathen who they're on the other side of the coin. You have like Jericho, where they're seeing and they're thinking, what is wrong with these insane people? Their God is more powerful than any of the gods of the other nations. But yet here they are, disobedience to the most powerful God in the universe, and they were cowering in fear. If the children of Israel ever come through here, we're doomed, and so this whole thing was to drive everybody to Jesus, is that Jesus is for the non-Jew as well as the Jew. Yeah. So Jesus is the forgiver of sins for both Jew and non-Jew, and that's the whole idea of that scripture is talking about the idea of salvation for all mankind. Yeah. That's been manifest for all mankind through this very, very complicated process of the natural branches, as the Bible talks about, of the children of Israel being torn out. And so you have like this plan, this God's plan, with the natural branches being torn out, and then the wild branches being grafted in, the non-Jew being grafted in, so that now they're the children of God. And then out of that, there's a jealousy that comes and says, hey, we're the children of God, not you guys. And they want to come back and be a part of that tree again. And so God can graft them in, but now he's grafting them into Christ, not according to the law. And so the genius of all this, of being able to literally rip the children of Israel away from the law that actually God imposed upon them in order to exercise them to godliness, and then tear them out of that and say, okay, yeah, because it didn't work, and that was the whole point. See, the law doesn't work. law, reaping of consequences, sowing and reaping, all these kinds of things. This can't change you. No matter what happens to you, no matter how horrible the consequences, you're still going to stay the same. Mm-hmm. So out you go. These people over here who have already been reaping the consequences of everything under the sun and know God can't stand them, and is they're not allowed to come anywhere near God. Now all of a sudden Jesus comes, and now they can come and they can be a part of that. And then the real children, hey, what about us? Okay, well, now you guys can come back in, but now everybody's in Christ. The grace, forgiveness, all that kind of stuff that we talked about in the beginning. So you have all that, and so you've got this brilliant plan, and that's the part one. It's to everybody. Yeah. And then part two is the idea of that I just described. Is all the things, the attributes of God, the children of Israel being delivered from Egypt, God doing a miracle for them, even in 1948 when Israel became a nation in a day, which is prophesied in the Old Testament. So you have all of these examples of God fulfilling his prophecies through Scripture. In modern times, things. This stuff will never happen, and now we're seeing these things happen. Things that were said that could never happen. The idea of a one world mark, the mark of the beast. That's not that this is the mark of the beast, but the technology of the blockchain technology of currency, of electronic currency. I'm trying. What's the actual technical term for it? Lost it in my mind. Anyway, but the whole idea, of an electronic currency, one denominated currency. So you've got a currency. Bitcoin is worth so many $1,000. It's worth so many, yen. It's worth so many. So any place that's exchanged, it's going to be worth this value from these different currencies and things like that. But it has a relative value in every country, and can easily be converted, to a cryptocurrency. Thank you.
Crypto.
That was it. And so, but all of that is things that not too long ago, 30 years ago, was just stupid talk, unheard of, ridiculous talk. This is never going to happen. Like there's going to be a one world government. There's never, ever going to be a one world government, ever. And now we're coming closer and closer to the idea of a one world government all the time. Yeah. All the time. And for a long time, the major opponent of one world government was the United States. And now it depends on who's in office, where that ends up. We've had some that oppose, but we've had some that are very much interested in the idea. You had the EU. Well, you still do, but England has dropped out. And you have this EU leader, so this League of Nations, one leader, and now there's seems to be much more of a path of moving in that direction. And so, it's not to get into the big idea of all the all the things. The point that I'm making in this is that you have all these naysayers, or like the Bible's stupid because it says this and that's not going to happen kind of things. But as time goes on, more and more and more of those things that were never supposed to be able to happen are now becoming possibilities, and so you see all this kind of stuff, just like it was outlined in Scripture.
Mm-hmm. So there's that. Kay, you retracted your question. I don't know if that was, if you still wanted to ask that. We have a couple more minutes, but the without excuse. So they are without excuse. What does he mean by that?
Well, they can't stand before God and say, "I didn't know you were real," because there's enough evidence for those who are open-minded, and that really is the important element, is the idea of being open-minded, because it's there. The evidence is there. It's funny because I'll think, there'll be something I'm reading, some concept that will come up about the human body or how the human mind works or whatever it may be. And I think, how in the world can anybody just say this all evolved? I mean, this is, we don't even have the slightest idea how our minds work. None whatsoever. Zero. I mean, zero. Not 20% or 30% or something. No, zero. We don't know anything. We have no idea where thoughts come from. None whatsoever. We don't have any idea. We're not even close to that. We don't even know if they originate in the brain itself. We just don't know. We just see the results of a thought. And a lot of theology or psychology today is, this is the big question: is, do we treat the brain, as the source of depression and mental illness? Do we treat the brain, or do we treat the thinking, the process of thinking? And so, what's basically happening is both. Is that because we don't know the relationship between thoughts and physical makeup, and so it goes backwards and forwards. So you have thoughts trigger chemical reactions, or do chemical reactions trigger thoughts? And right now with our current technology, it's like we don't know. We don't know the answer because it looks like it could be both. Yeah. And then there are things that, like this book I was talking about, Feeling Good, he's talking about, drug treatments. And the issue of drug treatments is that they're just not sure. They're not sure whether the drug treatments, because it's different, they're side effects. Yeah. And they don't know if the side effects are from the treatment, the drugs themselves, or are they the effect of the drug on the person and the person's thoughts that are triggering the side effects. Yeah. So they don't know, so they all they can do is just kind of try to, balance out the kind of chemicals that they're giving them and how to work it out. And then it's like, okay, we need to look at behavioral things, but then we also need to look at physical things as well, and try to work these things out. And so it's really, to me, it's very, very fascinating. And to just write that off as just being an evolutionary process I'm trying to think of a good word to use to describe it, but I can't really think of anything. But it's sad. I mean, in so many ways, because it can only be enhanced by understanding God. Because when you understand God, then you understand that these are things that He built into us. Yeah. And so these didn't happen by accident, and they're not. So the idea, like we're all the problems with gender and things like that. There's nothing positive that's coming out of gender fluidity. There's nothing positive that's going forward. It's just causing more hurt. You have people that are taking elective surgeries now, and then having reverse elective. They're electing to reverse back, but the reverse back leaves them less of a physical person, because going the one direction, you can do this once, you can change, and you can still kind of function, and you need some therapy and medicinal therapies and things like that, to be able to move forward like that. But going backwards is almost always permanent damage. It's almost always permanent damage, and the one place where it's the most permanent is in intimacy. And what a tragedy that is that, you go, okay, I have problems because I think I feel more comfortable as a woman than a man. So you have that change, and then you realize, no, that's not where you're at. And you come back, and now you're neither a man nor a woman. Yeah. In terms of intimacy anymore. I mean, you can still be intimate, but the whole idea of, the body functions and things will keep it G-rated, but those things stop working, and you're no longer able to be intimate, and you just have to live that. It's, and it's just all there is to it. And it's tragic, because if you understand that God created man, He created women, and He created in this way on purpose for a reason, and that a lot of the ideas and thoughts that we have in terms of what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman is totally wrong. They're just totally wrong, because they're not, it comes down to competition, and things like that. And God never created men and women to be in competition with each other. They were to be compatible with each other. They were to be
Complementary.
Complementary. That's the word I was looking for. Thank you. Yeah, they're looking to be complementary, and complementary by definition means you're not going to be the same. You can't be the same and be complementary. You have to be different to be complementary, and those differences are the wonder of what it means to be human. And when you can grasp that and understand that as a man, this is how God created me, or as a woman, this is how God created me. And it's not about stereotypes. It's about getting down deeper inside of the understanding of why God says the things that he says about men and women, women are oppressed and this and that and the other thing, all this kind of crazy stuff. But the truth of the matter is when you have a woman who is a genuine God-fearing woman and a man who's a genuinely God-fearing man, you have two people that are compatible. They are compatible. One doesn't take the lower seat, because there is no lower seat. You can take a point of view and you can say, well, the man has the higher seat in this realm, but then you take another point of view and, well, the woman has the higher seat in this realm. And it goes backwards and forwards. And so you don't have, so a lot of this confusion that's going on is just simply because we do not understand how God created us. And this is a big problem, is that, but scientifically, we see these things. We can see them. We know how the human body develops. We know different things. We know that the functionality of a woman is different from the functionality of a man. And all these kinds of issues, we know these things. It's not just some arbitrary idea, that it's funny now, we can tell the sex of a baby, within weeks after conception, within weeks. Well, what does that tell you? That tells you that it's more than just body parts, because we know the sex of a baby, what it's going to be. Yeah. Not what it is at that moment. We don't look and go, oh, look there. Oh, that's a boy. Yeah. That's a girl. We don't have to do that anymore, because our technology, we understand that you can, at a blood level, you could tell a boy or a girl from their blood. Yeah. So what does that tell you about creation? What does it tell you about how God has created us? And so the confusion and all the trouble that we have, really a lot of it comes down to the fact is that we just don't understand how God created us.
Okay, last question here from Kay. People clearly don't see God as important. Why do you think that is? They quickly relate God to religion, hence religious conversations. Why do you think that happens?
Well, that's the thing, is that we don't know for sure. From my own personal experience, I didn't know God was real. I did believe there was a God. Being totally honest, it wasn't that I knew there was a God and that's all there was. That's all there was to it. It's just something inside, I believed there was a God. And so, but religion is the manifestation of God that you see. It's the first manifestation of God that you see growing up, is religion. And that, I think, is why there's the identity with God and religion comes into play, is because, is God the Hindu God? Is he the Muslim God? Is he the Christian God? If he's a God, he must be somehow connected to a religion. And then to the day of awakening, like for me personally, is to realize he's not the God of any of those. He's completely independent from all that. And these are all, and they've been going on since the beginning of time. Religion has been around since the beginning of time. You can see that through right from the beginning. Adam and Eve were religious. Yeah. God told them what to do, and they didn't go, okay, well, you're God. And they said, well, maybe we can get around this. If we eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, then maybe we don't have to listen to God. So religion's always been there. It's always been there. It's just religion is the concepts. It's not the word I want to use, but it works. The concepts of the human mind. And it's the construction of God in the human mind is what religion is, because we create it in our image, the way we want things to be. But the real God lives outside of all that. And that's why we don't know who he is until we get to that place to where somebody can introduce us to him, who already know him.
Yeah.
That is such a critical factor.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, I hope tonight was informative. That's all I have as far as questions go. And we hope that you come and join us again. But we also have services in person. If you've never been to one of our services, we invite you to come and see for yourself. Like the podcast tonight explained, God really is practical, and you can find the evidence. And so we invite you, and we challenge you even to come and see for yourself. And so more to come. We'll see everybody next week. Again, tomorrow night in person. We are at 1100 Industrial Road in San Carlos, Suite 10. We have services